All right, I'll call the meeting to order at 7:03. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Allred,
Here?
Ms. Billman,
Here.
Mr. Fell,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins,
Here.
Ms. Sims,
Here.
All right, so it looks like we have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
there are none.
Approval of the minutes. So we have two sets of minutes to approve. Do we need to do those separately, I imagine? Or?
Might as well.
Okay. So approval of the minutes from the March 24th, 2022 Plan Commission meeting. Are there any motions or comments on the minutes from that meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
So we have a motion by Mr. Fell. We have a second by Ms. Billman. Any discussion? So we can do a voice vote, right? Remembering these things
Yes.
still now. Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, so that passes. And then we have approval of the minutes from the April 7th, 2022 Plan Commission meeting. Are there any motions or comments on the minutes from our last meeting? Ms. Billman.
I move that we approve the minutes of April 7th, 2022.
All right, so we have a motion by Ms. Billman. Any second?
I'll second it.
Second by Ms. Sims. Any discussion of the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Do we have any communications?
Yes, and I'm going to pass these out. Terry printed them off. Just pass these out. We received this email this afternoon in regards to the R7 text amendment. It reiterates kind of what we talked about last meeting, and you can all read it for yourselves.
Do we need to read this in, or?
No, if you want to give a brief summary beyond what Kat has already given, then you're welcome to.
Okay, it looks like it's a comment in opposition of a one-size-fits-all policy change.
And this
Specifically-
for the R7.
Yeah,
text
this is for the
amendment?
R7, changes to the R7 zoning district. Some concerns specifically about the west side block face of Lincoln Avenue and further west versus the east side block face of Lincoln Avenue. So concerns that those are not differentiated in any changes, and Greek houses versus boarding houses. And then some specific language, but I can't really tell what's different from what was proposed. Do you know?
I will say, since our last meeting, talking about the two options for the R7 district, I think this was in regard to our language that was written before last meeting. Since our determination at the last Plan Commission meeting was to go with what we've called option 2, I think all of Lois Steinberg's concerns were incorporated into our text amendment language.
Okay, so the special use option addresses most of these concerns?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so general concerns that all of the properties not be treated the same, I guess, is the summary of this. All right. So that brings us to our continued public hearings. First off is plan case number 2438T22, an application by the Urbana zoning administrator to amend the Urbana zoning ordinance to allow for limited residential, commercial, and public uses in existing buildings located in the R7 University Residential Zoning District. So I know there was an updated memo. Is there going to be another presentation, or?
I will keep it very brief. Can you
Okay.
guys hear me okay?
Excuse me, before we begin again, I remind everyone I'm abstained from the voting, but will participate in the discussion for this case.
Okay.
So I'll just restate a few things from our last meeting, and then address a few things that were discussed at last meeting that I think needed a little bit of follow-up. A reminder, this is a text amendment. The zoning administrator proposes to amend Article 5 of the zoning ordinance to add new special uses for existing buildings in the R7 University Residential Zoning District. The text amendment would also amend Articles 8 and 9 to alter parking requirements and sign regulations for commercial uses in the district. At the last Plan Commission meeting, we asked you all to discuss the proposal with two options for these uses and provide direction to staff on how to proceed. Tonight, we're asking that the Plan Commission forward Plan Case 2438T22 to City Council with a recommendation to approve the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance. And this is really my only slide, but wanted to clarify what we talked about last meeting. We discussed the two options for allowing commercial uses in the R7 district. Option 1 would have allowed some commercial uses by right in existing buildings on and west of Lincoln Avenue if they met certain criteria. Option 2 would allow commercial uses in existing buildings with only a special use permit. The Plan Commission felt that requiring a special use permit for commercial uses in existing buildings would be the best approach. That's symbolized by this map here. So every property in pink is where a commercial use would be allowed with a special use permit. Proposed commercial uses would be handled on a case-by-case basis through the special use permit process, and parking could be handled through that process as well. It could also provide the opportunity for public input at the Plan Commission and City Council meetings. Just an update from our last meeting as well. Multiple commercial uses could go into an existing building without a commercial use permit. That was something we had talked about. If two principal structures went onto a lot, it would require a special use permit. But two commercial uses or two uses in general could go into one building without a conditional use permit. That said, for any commercial use that's going to go into an existing Greek house, each of those uses would require a special use permit and also a certificate of occupancy. That's issued by building safety. And then our recommendation. So the Plan Commission has the following options in Plan Case 2438T22. Forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the text amendment as presented. Forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the text amendment as modified by specific suggested changes. Or forward the case to City Council with a recommendation of denial of the text amendment. Staff recommends that the Plan Commission forward the case to City Council with a recommendation of approval. And I can take any additional questions you guys might have now.
Thank you, Ms. Trotter. Any questions for staff? Mr. Fell?
Just clarification. So now in the new text amendment, there's no differentiation between a Greek house and a rooming house or any other use. They're all considered the same, correct?
Correct. This
Okay.
is going to apply to all of the R7 University Residential Zoning District. But like we stated last meeting, we'll probably follow up with some zoning changes in some capacity to address the boarding houses specifically.
Any other questions for staff?
So are we going to have some extended discussion?
Yes.
I was not here
Yep.
at the previous meeting.
I figure we'll treat this, we'll open it up for public input again and then go into discussion. All right, so, like I said, thank you, Ms. Trotter. We'll open this up for public input again. So anyone that wants to address the commission about this case, you can come forward. You are.
So my name is Danny Otto. I live at 405 West Illinois Street in Urbana. I think this is headed in the right direction. After the last meeting, it seemed like there was a consensus that every non-residential use should be done by special use permit. But I'm still puzzled because I know staff has had a lot of input from various of us about the confusion that's generated by this table of uses. There doesn't need to be any table of uses. It's very confusing. There are things on there that clearly would not go. Why suggest that it's on a permitted table of uses? Granted, it still has to go through special use process, but there are other sorts of things that possible uses that aren't listed there. And to have this table implies somehow that it's like the MOR or other sorts of things. And really, all that's needed is the addition at 8. The R7 district allows some business uses within existing structures. The district is intended to encourage the adaptive reuse of older structures. Every commercial use requires a special use permitting process, and that's defined in other parts of the code. So I think that this is confusing to a lot of people, and I think it's going to be confusing down the line as people come forward. I'm not going to go through and identify all of the things that clearly are out of line as an idea that you might want to consider if you're looking at making investment in this neighborhood, a hardware store, for example. There are other sorts of things. But then there's also some confusion generated by I don't see it on here right now, the references to PUDs. And it's not clear whether this is anything other than the current PUD process or whether somehow you have the right to do a PUD here even if you don't meet the minimal lot size requirements that's in the PUD process. So I really don't think that that needs to be mentioned in this language at all. There is a PUD process that applies to any lot, and it's suggestive here that that would get some sort of a preference. And I think many of the rest of us also think that it should go through the same guidelines, same standards as any other PUD and not have a special thing. So if the staff, I know this is not a Q&A, but if you could explain why, after numerous discussions, we've enumerated these problems, why you seem to be so firm on having this list of possible uses, none of them that can be done by right. Every one of them has to go through the process, so nothing is added to public information by having this list. And it could be understood by someone as delimiting that if it's not on the list, there's no point in applying for special use. Obviously, that's not the case. That's not the intention. But having the list there, I think, is confusing. And I would like to suggest that it be deleted.
Thanks for your comment. Staff, do you want to address any of those concerns?
Sure. Yeah, so our table of uses, if we don't list something on the table of uses as being permitted or permitted with a special use permit or with a conditional use permit, you cannot do it in the city. So that's why we're suggesting adding these parts to the table of uses that say specifically these are permitted with a special use permit.
Am I allowed to engage?
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
So is this true in every zoning category? Like R2, R3 has a list of permitted?
Yes,
And are those lists delimiting? So if it's not on the list, don't even try to get a special use permit?
that's correct.
Then I think that, you know, we need to do some more work in thinking about things that should be on the list. So that wasn't clear to me, and I didn't have time to read the rest of the code. So thank you for that clarification. But I think we do need to look at that list more carefully. And one of the things that I know, because I've had friends and acquaintances who are independent consultants on a variety of things, work in their home, who say, maybe their job, they're not working for themselves, they're working remotely, and they say, if I could rent office space so I can go from home someplace to work. So some of these places that are now dorm room type things, I think there would be a very viable market so close to the university for that sort of thing. I don't know what it's called, but co-something?
Yeah, co-working spaces.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that one needs to think about, because I think in many circumstances, people would be fine with that. It's low traffic, but there would be a big market for that, I'm sure.
I will say, our table of uses doesn't do a great job of explaining what the uses actually are. So something like a co-working space might fit under the category of office, professional office, or studio, both of which are included on this list. But like I said, they're not always well described by the title that they're given. That also comes into consideration when we're posed with uses. We have to fit them into categories in the table of uses, which can be challenging.
And it's also possible to add uses to the table. That's one of the other agenda items tonight, so.
No, I think some of the confusion might be is because the way we presented it in the staff memo is we're only showing the proposed changes to the table that would apply in the R7 district, but the table itself is full of every single use that we allow in the city. R7 is just one column among all of the different districts in that table. So we tried to set it up like this for simplicity's sake, but this table as it's presented in the memo it's not going to show up as a standalone table in the zoning ordinance. It will be incorporated into our already existing table of uses, which is much more massive.
Great, thank you.
And I guess I should speak to the PUD
Yes, the PUD
question as well.
question.
Yeah, so PUDs are already allowed in the R7 district, and this would just be, it would be keeping it the same, and they would have to follow the standard PUD process, which now includes a public hearing before the Plan Commission meeting. Sorry, a neighborhood meeting,
Yes.
not a public hearing.
Yes. All right. Seeing as there's no one else here, we'll declare the public input portion closed and now go into discussion and possibly entertain motions to vote. So is there any discussion on the proposal?
I'm still working from the hard copy of the old. Where's the table of uses? I've got the individual districts. Where in the ordinance is the table of uses?
Oh, it'll be table 5-1. Not sure what page it is off the top of my head. Page 63, perhaps?
Doesn't look like it's still 5-1. Oh, here we go. Got it. Okay. Yep.
48.
Yep.
It's not that far.
As I say, I'm still working on a hard copy of the old edition. Sorry for making life difficult. So I don't know how close, I feel a little like an interloper since I wasn't here last time, okay?
We can take our
Well,
time.
It's not the first time we've discussed this. But I'm a little unclear where we're going or how close we think we are to acting. And my sense is we've got a ways to go. If I'm out of sorts on that, I'd be, as I go, I'd like to know whether I'm throwing wrenches or in sync, let's put it that way.
I think we'd value any discussion. I think where we left off last time, we were leaning towards what was presented as the sole option now, which was basically to require a special use permit for any commercial use,
Yeah, okay.
as a way to address concerns
So
about differentiating between properties.
Let me back up to where I was last time we talked about this, which may be a year ago. I don't remember. And maybe starting by some scenarios that may or may not make sense. My understanding at the moment is that under this ordinance, although it's not what we are intending to happen, by right, someone could knock down a Greek house and build a dormitory.
I don't think so.
Why not?
Yes, but they could do that today.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but we're not trying to sustain today, we're trying to improve the situation, and I don't think we've accounted for that.
Well, okay. No, go ahead, sorry.
So that's just one example of where I don't think we've got this figured out. The idea to me of treating R7, even though we're saying we're going to fix it later, I think that's the wrong approach. I think we're opening ourselves to a mess by not appropriately dealing with the major differences between the non-Greek and the Greek buildings we have, because we have very different intentions for those buildings. My sense is we'd be reasonably happy if some of the R7s were knocked down and replaced with duplexes, or replaced with maybe even fourplexes if the lot's a 300-foot lot. We'd rather not have that happen with Greek houses, but we haven't accomplished that by this ordinance. And I think the flip side of what I think we're trying to do is make it more attractive to potential reusers of Greek houses than it is now. And to do that, the main objective, I think, is to simplify that process. That is to reduce the costs of accomplishing that process. And I think by not distinguishing between Lincoln Avenue and West and east of Lincoln Avenue, we are making the process more complicated, because we are requiring for Lincoln Avenue and West what we feel we have to require for Lincoln Avenue and East. And they're really very different situations. If I were to imagine the table of uses, which I think is in need of pretty drastic revision, I would envision a different table of uses for east of Lincoln and Lincoln and West. And the objectives would be to give reasonable expectations to somebody trying to do something east of Lincoln, and quit pretending that we would let them, or our community would let them do do these things, but that some of the things west of Lincoln, we might want to make easier to do, because we'd actually like somebody to do them. And at the moment, it's still too hard to do them, even with the new ordinance. So, I'm a little confused why we are where we are in this, because I think we had this conversation a year and a half ago. And anyway, I wasn't involved, so again, maybe I'm the one who's out to lunch on this.
What was the context to the previous conversation? The one you said was a year and a half ago?
We,
What were-
we did a study session on this.
Yeah.
Somebody could come up with, I know it's within the last 20-plus years, because that's how long I've been here, but I think it was pretty recent.
July of last year.
Okay, yeah, so less than a year ago. And I think I said something pretty similar at the time.
Well, that was one of, so there were two options that were presented last time, and one of the options kind of did what you're describing. It differentiated between properties on the west and properties on the east. Right, if I'm remembering that
Well, it
correctly?
was, as Lou said, it was sort of along Lincoln Avenue and west,
Yeah,
and then everything off of the
so
block
east,
face of Lincoln to the east.
east and west sides of Lincoln were, and west of Lincoln were one, yeah. And the discussion last time was something you brought up.
Well, I think several things, but one of the things to kind of Lou's point is staff is presenting this as this is the option of, the best option to deal with the R7 existing R7 properties to use an existing property. So this ordinance specifically eliminates any, or does not yet address what you do with a building when you tear it down. This is only to put commercial use inside an existing R7 building. So rightly or wrongly, this is addressing the R7 properties piecemeal, kind of. Because part of my question, that I think speaks to some of yours, is somebody's going to want to tear one of these down pretty soon, and we have to deal with that, and we have no vehicle to deal with that yet. And that is a bigger problem in my mind. An additional problem to me is differentiating between Greek houses and other houses, because I can think of at least 3 Greek houses that are now no longer Greek houses. And what are they under this ordinance if we differentiate between them? It's one's a rooming house, one's a church. So I don't know if those are still Greek houses or not. So that's another layer of what we do here. And so to back up again, the intent of this is only to deal with what are we going to do with the commercial use in an existing building and nothing else. We don't address the other problems with the R7 district yet.
So can
Yes.
I ask if there was a study session, what were the recommendations that came out of the study sessions? Did they address any of the questions that are being proposed here? It would be nice to know what, if, I think of a study session being sort of an intense exploration of a topic with some expertise.
I think one of the main sort of tasks or recommendation to come out of that was to engage with the public, which is what they did. There's an extensive outreach that happened and that they've reported on. I think that the hope, if I'm remembering the discussion, was that based on that would generate recommendations, which they came to us with.
But it seems like if these questions, I'm sorry, right, if these questions were posed a year ago, I guess I would wonder, right, it seems like we're still, even in our discussion, we're still challenged with rooming houses versus Greek houses. It seems like the question about how, I was concerned about the historical value and how do we do some preservation, if that's one of the values. And the third question that seems to be proposed is, it's actually 4, right? So the clear distinction between what side of the street, right? What's happening for primarily residential versus commercial mixed-use areas, And then the fourth option was this bigger question around how do you, if you want to create development, what's the simplest way to create development if that's the goal? So those seem like really important. So it feels like we were close to sort of thinking about the special use permit being like the fix, but I don't now, like hearing the questions that were posed a while ago, I don't know if that fixes the questions that you're proposing now. And I don't know if there's a fix.
So I am reluctant to move forward on a piecemeal basis because I think we've got a big enough mess and I'm afraid we're creating a bigger one. At a minimum, the table of uses is a mess. So Greek houses may have two attributes of definition. One is whether they were included in the historical register nomination as a building. And that to me is relevant because one of the reasons we are making this distinction is because of a feeling that some of these buildings ought to be kept because of the quality of the building. All right, so if they weren't included in that historical nomination, that to me means they're not Greek houses. Now, current use of a Greek house, you could argue changes that, but I'm not sure it does, because our primary criterion is the quality of the structure. And unless that modified use changed the quality of the structure in some way that would disqualify it from the historic nomination list, then I think it's still on that list. So, I'm trying to set something up to be refuted, if you like. But it seems to me that that's a distinction we can make between the Greek houses that are currently in R7 and anything else in R7. The idea that the Greek houses on Ohio are going to be subject to the same permitted use, including permitted special uses, as the Greek houses on Lincoln or on Nevada west of Lincoln. To me, it complicates the process because it sets up a general list of expectations that are clearly wrong. It's why make it that difficult? So it seems to me that we can make those two distinctions. And if we make those two distinctions, then it seems to me we should also be able to deal with the rest of R7. Because the rest of R7, we're not trying to preserve the buildings. I don't think there's any building that's not on the historic list that's an R7 building that we're actually trying to preserve. I could be wrong, again. I'm setting up to be refuted.
Depends on who you mean when you say we. I mean, when the development on Lincoln between California and Oregon was proposed, some were upset that some of those buildings were going to be torn down, which wouldn't meet the definition of what you're calling the Greek houses, I'm pretty sure.
Right. But the opposition was also to what was proposed, at least as much as to what was being torn down.
Sure. I'm just.
And by right, what could have been built there would probably not have been opposed, given the replacement quality of what could have been built by right. I guess what I'm trying to argue is,
Possibly.
I live in a neighborhood too. The reason to oppose something being knocked down is often because of what is proposed to replace it. And sometimes there's some houses around that, if they could be replaced with a different house, would really be nice. But if they're not going to be replaced with a house, then of course we want to say what's there, because we want it to be a house, and we don't know any other way to keep it a house. But that also implies that those buildings would have different permitted use lists. So I'm not sure what those are, but my guess is that if it's not on Lincoln, it's only residential for the other R7s that are not Greek houses. Because we're not trying to find a way to save the building as a building. We're trying to find a way to save the neighborhood as a residential neighborhood.
I just have a question. Where does the Royer House fit in all this?
That building is a national landmark. I believe we have it in our building types map as a rooming house.
It's R7 zone?
Correct.
Okay, but it's on the historical register.
National and local
Yes.
as
Okay,
well.
so this is the refutation, but the logic still applies. So it's not a Greek house, but it's a historical register house. It's a building that we are trying to say the building because of the quality of the building. So we, as I said, we got work to do. But that, to me, then gets included with, let's change the notion. It's not Greek houses we're trying to save. It's historic building quality that we're trying to save. So we have a different distinction we're making.
So I hear that as a solution, and then I also hear number 2 as your sort of second solution, which is, the clear distinction between one side of the street being mixed use, the other side being clearly identified as residential and keeping. So those are the 2 suggestions?
Well, I think
Or
those are two
cover-
mechanisms to
two
try to
two
make this
mechanisms
work.
to massage. I just want to be
Yeah.
sure I'm
So-
hearing. Okay.
So let's think some more about how to do that. Because I think the office suggestion from Mr. Otto was an interesting example of maybe one of the ways to try to think about the different, so we have a 2x2 matrix. I think that's suggested on something we just got from the communication from this thing. That there's historic properties, I'm using shorthand now, and there's east and west properties. Okay, shorthand. One of the things we could do is try to construct permitted use table entries for each of the cells of that 2x2. And I'm thinking of that, not necessarily that would be the result, but it strikes me as a good thinking process. Because, it's a way of discovering, do we really want them to be different in all 4 cells? Maybe, maybe not. What should the differences be?
Perhaps we need 6 cells of Greek houses and non-Greek houses of what we do, because I feel, in a way, we're starting over, kind of, in a way, right? And if we do that, does it afford us a different opportunity? Because to me, one of the dilemmas is what we do with a Greek house and what we do with a non-Greek house. Maybe-
So
maybe-
you're distinguishing between Royer and the Greek House primarily? I mean, when
Well,
you say we need six.
that's part of our definition of what's a Greek house and what isn't. A rooming house, let's say, just one of the regular old rooming houses that we don't care
Right.
if it gets torn down. That's a different situation than a Greek house. Maybe one of the things we want to do initially is separate these two things out.
Right.
And I don't know what the appropriate way to do that. I think one appropriate way may be I believe the houses that are more rooming houses did not, or have a less reasonable expectation of trying to put a commercial use into them. Is it appropriate to separate those out and do something else with them? And I think what might be appropriate is they get absorbed into the zoning district that they're in, right? And now we've taken care of part of our problem, and we have a smaller problem to deal with. Is that a way to start this issue?
So now,
I'm just
wait a
gonna
minute.
open that
You-
back up.
You said we may need 6 cells.
Well,
I'm not sure what the
for
3 by
you-
2 make.
For you, we have Greek houses and non-Greek houses. Yeah, but also
Well-
rooming houses, the other of what's a Greek house and what isn't. So
So, we've got Greek houses plus Royer. At the moment, that's all I know of. Obviously, somebody has to check. That is an historic building that's currently R7.
Yeah, I mean, there's other ones that are former Greek houses that are being used for rooming houses or churches or whatever, so.
So, but they are in the historic nomination of the set of Greek houses that was made nationally, correct? But
yeah,
not locally.
They would have been, yeah.
So I think that I indicated before, my suggestion is those be included based on that nomination list, because it's the building we're concerned about. So when you say we're separating the rooming houses and the Greek houses and what's not a Greek house, so maybe we need a 3 by 2. There's real Greek houses in the nomination, that is real former Greek houses in nomination. There's other historic nominations, the Royer House being at the moment the only one I know of. And the third is anything else, that is rooming houses. So you got 3 categories now, and east and west. All right, so now you got a 3 by 2.
What if
And
we just,
know that Royer House is the only one in there, so we already know 1 cell is vacant. Sorry if other people don't think in matrices.
I'm trying to write it down here.
But then, I think that makes clear what we're trying to accomplish. And then we can say, the main thing we do here is define the table of uses for each case. And the table of uses always includes conditional uses and special uses in every district.
what if we just called it buildings of historical distinction and buildings of non-historical distinction? So we
Well-
have 2. What would be the reason to have 3, I guess I'm trying to.
Well, I was trying to get at what Andrew was referring to. And I think from somebody who's going to talk to developers, the distinction is the Greek houses we're talking about are very different structures from the Royer House. So we know we're not going to put commercial in the Royer House because it's not going to meet any code requirement that you could ever construct to put anything in there as a commercial use. So it's kind of the outlier, but it requires a separate or a more complex definition than I started with, which was just the historical documents. And the Royer House current use is a boarding house? Under R7, okay.
Yes. So I just want to just clarify what we're trying to do with this text amendment. And we understand that there are differences between Greek houses and rooming houses. What we're trying to do right now is come up with relatively clear rules that will help us preserve Greek houses. So yes, those rules will apply to rooming houses that happen to be in the R7 district right now. But just trying to wrap my head around how we could somehow wrap in taking rooming houses and dealing with them at the same time as we're doing this other stuff, which is what I think everybody wants to see, which is preserving the Greek houses. It just seems like too much and too complicated to do in one text amendment. I mean, some of these houses probably should just be rezoned to R4. That would give people the option to either work under the new R7 rules that that we'll hopefully be enacting, or tear it down, put up an apartment building or whatever that, well, if it's R4, let's say, it would be probably an apartment building that fits in with the development regulations of that district, which are pretty limiting. So, what goes up would probably be something that fits in with the neighborhood. But I think what we're getting into tonight is sort of trying to get into that next step, which is, okay, how do we deal with this? It's less than 20 properties that are rooming houses. So I think we've got great momentum. We've had some fantastic public meetings. We've gotten just amazing feedback. And I think we think we're going in the right direction. So I don't want to put the brakes on and say, well, how do we deal with rooming houses now? That's just, as the person proposing this text amendment to begin with, that's where I'm coming from.
So even with the Greek houses, we still have to do drastic work on the table of uses. And I can't imagine the table of uses being effective if it's not split, even for Greek houses, ignoring all other stuff. Should be the same east and west.
And I'm confused about something that you just said, so maybe I can get more clarification. Because when the process of the historical records house sort of was articulated, which seems like it captures most of the properties here and there, right? Like it seems like, what about using that conceptualization limits you or feels like it derails the work that you've done? Because that would help me understand like the weeds, because there's something and there's something nuanced that I'm missing.
Well, I just think when discussions are happening, I'm thinking in my head how we would actually get this into our ordinance. And I think that would just involve more complication, because we would have to write in a lot of, references in there to this list and that list. And I just want something that's going to be simple for us to, or for me to administer as the zoning administrator. I really like that idea for the next step. So when we're actually trying to say, okay, now that we've done this text amendment, how are we going to deal with the rooming houses? If we say, hey, anything that's on the National Register nomination list, we're not going to mess with those. We're just going to focus on this specific subset and figure out how to deal with those. So that's the approach that I'm looking for.
So, to Lou's comment, so right now, it's treated by asterisks in the table. So there's an asterisk single asterisk for the residential uses, double asterisk for the commercial uses. It's possible to imagine taking some of that away, right? If we wanted to go down the route of deciding that some are just not prohibited uses.
Yeah, we can get into the weeds on that. I think just from a practical standpoint, if somebody proposes a hardware store, like nobody's going to propose a hardware store because, like Danny has said a few times, that's just not going to fit. People aren't going to propose it. So whether it's in the list or whether it's in the table or not, it probably doesn't matter.
I get what you're saying from the market sort of feasibility of it, but I think what we're hearing is there's the perception and this, like the signaling that this does, probably less so, like there's not a hardware store owner that's out there thinking, oh, great, I can do this now. But I think we have to consider how legible something like this is to the community and how they understand the intent of something. So that's one sort of consideration. We can talk more about that. My other sort of thought was, in terms of how to address some of Lou's comments, was that, I mean, if we wanted to try and address some of the 2x2 or the 3x3 matrix, I mean, we could break off the east-west divide with another asterisk, right, or something like that, and still not derail the approach that's been used so far.
Sure, we have that option.
Okay.
So another clarification, because I realized that I was editing something that actually isn't part of the ordinance. The table that you shown with all the asterisks is actually not going to be part of the ordinance. Because what's in the ordinance will be the page that lists them under headings of special use or whatever. And table 5.1, which uses S's, P's, C's, et cetera, to indicate for any given use. So that table and what's proposed, as I understand it, is actually from my view, a distraction from thinking about how it actually appears. And the
But we'll-
footnotes to that table are actually not footnotes to the ordinance, because I was going to edit the footnotes. There's problems in the footnotes. Am I right about how that goes?
Well, I'm not sure I totally followed your question, but I mean, what we proposed in the staff memo is basically just taking only the parts or only the rows of the table that we would be changing and just showing those. So
But-
all these uses that we have in here would be sort of interspersed in that larger table that's,
Right.
Yeah.
But there wouldn't be a double asterisk and an explanation below the table. There would be an S.
oh, no, there would have to be an explanation
that's-
because they're only allowed in existing buildings. I can't remember the language. Yeah, we
Okay,
want
so-
to make sure that we're letting people know you can
Okay,
do
so
these
that-
only under these certain circumstances.
Okay, well, and that's one of the problems of the footnotes then. Okay.
Yeah, it would get complicated because there's already up to 4 asterisks in the footnotes. for the
Yeah,
table.
I mean,
The zoning ordinance needs a lot of work. We're doing the best we can with,
You're gonna have to come up with some different
you know,
symbols, I think.
to slot this into our existing, not so easy to use table. But yes,
Yeah.
the idea is these uses would show up in the table,
Right.
and there would be a footnote that says, here's where they're, here's how they are proposed. Because there's not really an elegant way to put that into the table,
so-
because there's
so,
not, yeah.
but again, I'm in the mode of trying to think this thing through by imagining how we represent it. So let's imagine we choose the letter E as existing, and we use E in the table for any zoning district and use in which the special use is restricted to existing buildings. And then the table of uses retains its form. And the district description sheet can retain its form. And the definition of footnote double asterisk has to be reworded because at the moment it appears to say that they're permitted in existing buildings if there's a special use permit, which implies that they're permitted in non-existing buildings without a special use permit. And I don't think that's what is intended.
That's not what's intended. I have to look at this, though.
But that might be the definition for E in the table. And I still think we gotta look at that table because the message it sends both, I mean, you can say it doesn't matter because nobody's gonna do it, but that makes us look like we're not doing our work. Because we're supposed to be giving people reasonable expectations, both the people who don't want these things to happen and the people who do want them to happen. And I think we need to work at it a little.
And I think that information's in a lot of the responses to the engagement in the survey, if I remember. I mean, it would be possible to make a pass at the list. Right?
Anything is possible. they say.
Anything's possible.
Like I said, I wasn't here.
I mean, I
Sorry.
think one of the issues with our table of uses is that it has so many different uses. It's missing uses that you think it should have. And so you get into this situation where you have to try and, where you're really laser focused on the use, whereas when we put out our survey for this, we just use broad categories, which I think makes a lot more sense, but we're kind of stuck with the table of uses that we have. I mean, if our table of uses only had, let's say, like 20 total uses, and there were like retail and, you know, food service stuff, like if they were just broad categories, that would probably make things a lot easier because it would keep us from having to get bogged down and nitpicky on this stuff.
But some of the distinctions matter. I mean, the current list for this includes liquor sales.
It does,
Yeah.
because I could see a really fine wine shop in
On
an old
Ohio
Greek
Street.
in an old Greek house in West Urbana. I think people might love that. So you apply for your special use permit and you come out and you give your pitch and you get that. Plus you have to get a liquor license, and the mayor controls that. So there are levels of, you know, of review for some of these sort of more.
So the one I've struggled with the whole time that you've dismissed because I've traveled and worked with college students and been a mom is the one that you said no one would ever want to have a hardware store. And I have been in so many boutique areas, Indianapolis, Broad Ripple, where hardware stores are now in every trendy, yuppie, buppy area. And if you think about moving your child into college, the hammer, the lumber, the containers, so I'm like, why? Like, you're like, no one would ever want that. And like, everywhere I am, there are these cute, trendy boutique. And so that's why I'm like, I'm really struggling when I think of the things that are in and out and the things that sort of get dismissed. I just know from my lived experience watching neighborhoods transform and change, that things that people are imagining living differently. And I think COVID has upended people's conceptualization of things. And so I would not want us to be thinking now and not 5 years from now, where there will be shifts in demographic and, you know, every home show has something trendy that people want to try, right? And so I guess I want to be sure our table is not just focused on our lived experience and not what is coming, because that's what makes a neighborhood marketable, is it has the amenities that all the trendy people have. And we could be so restrictive that we miss market trends.
That's a great point.
And that may again get back to Ohio Street, that is east of Lincoln versus west of Lincoln. For example, the sororities along Nevada Street are probably the last ones that are going to cease being sororities because of their locations. But on the other hand, their locations in the middle of campus as private property that the university would probably buy. We've been through that case, and I think before the time of anybody else here, of the university getting mad at us for allowing something that would make the property more expensive when they buy it. But shopping along Nevada Street, we've already got that neighborhood that way, so that could make sense. But yeah,
There's good points on both sides of this.
I feel like we need some way to organize where to go next. What is the structure for what we're doing here?
Well, I think, you know, it's still on the table to make a motion and address what's been proposed. I think we've wavered back and forth, further away from it and then back closer to it. So I don't know that that's not something that we would consider still.
All right, I'll weigh in a little bit. I think, to me, that we realize and staff realizes that this is a very large issue that encompasses many facets. I think what staff is trying to do is take one bite out of this apple and make it a little smaller so we can deal with it a little easier next time. Lou's point of differentiating between east and west of Lincoln, I think is a valid one. To me, I made a point in the meeting, since we're still in discussion, of I didn't think a special use permit anywhere was too big of a hill to climb for someone who wanted to do a business. And for instance, what I would want to discourage, not that I want to believe this might happen, but I don't want the college kid with a dorm room full of comic books to say, I don't need a permit, I can open a comic book store downstairs and sell all my comics, and he opens a store for 3 weeks and then leaves. And I worry that kind of thing, if it's by right, could just, especially in a fraternity, could just happen over and over. So to me, requiring a special use permit means that the entrepreneur has to be serious about what he wants to do and put more thought into it than this is a whim of starting a business. So for me, a special use permit in any case was not too big of a jump, okay? I also would much rather take a bigger bite out of this apple if we could. But I'm also willing to take the bite we have and direct staff to please work harder on the issues, because I think that the rest of what has to happen in R7 is bigger than this, I think. and it's going to create more problems, and it has to be dealt with soon. Which, part of that also, I believe, is the giant matrix of uses has to be part of this whole process to clean that up. So I would say my opinion, rightly or wrongly, my opinion is I'm not voting on this issue, but I'm happy to take the bite we can get, because we can get it. And I'm worried if we ask staff to make this a bigger piece of this puzzle, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to kind of be back here, and this whole process is never going to get out of the bog that it's in. So that's my piece on the issue.
And I think the engagement that staff did with the public was pretty focused on that bite. So I think it would be hard to start doing things that kind of move from the narrow agenda that they took to the public and got input on. That's my opinion. Although I think it was the plan all along that this be a first step. And that's how it was presented the first time that you guys talked about this, that there would be a next part that would deal with at least the rooming houses.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we presented, or since we, first started the process, but I think, after a bit of time, it became apparent that, or to us, that this text amendment should really be focused on the task at hand, which it's the whole reason that we started pursuing this text amendment, is to help preserve existing Greek houses in the district. It's unfortunate that there's these sort of rooming houses that are tacked on that have been kind of, diverting attention. But we want to stay focused, and I think, definitely over the last few months, we've come to that conclusion that we really need to be focused on the whole reason that we started this process in the first place. Let's deal with the Greek houses. There's other ways we can deal with the rooming houses. And it would be tough to deal with rooming houses. Like, if people want to, do a rezoning of some of them, you can't do that in this current text amendment. We'd have to go out and, and renotice and go through a whole nother process. So if we're gonna have to go through a whole nother process, let's just go through a whole nother process after we deal with this specific thing we're trying to do.
So, focusing on the last comment, we could, in the text amendment, however, limit what is being described to the Greek houses or the historic dominate houses, so as to avoid special use permits in R7 in boarding houses?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could do that, but I think there are some of these rooming houses that I'm guessing, once we put these, if we put these regulations in place sort of as we presented them, I'm guessing there's some rooming houses where people are having trouble renting them. They're going to say, you know what, I'm going to keep the building, I'm going to, turn this into a 3-level apartment, and we're going to go with that because we can now do that under the new rules. So
Because
so if we were,
this gives them additional residential uses.
right.
Okay.
So it's not, it's not just
Got it.
commercial
Okay.
uses, it's also, that was kind of the main thing, and it seems like pretty much everybody is in agreement that residential uses, like apartments and things, that's fine, that's great.
What I lost was in the focus on the commercial, that you're actually adding residential permitted uses to R7.
Yeah, that's actually the big thing that is probably
So,
gonna
and
actually make
that's
some
up to
change.
R4? By right? I can't remember.
No change to the development regulations. The residential uses that would be added for existing buildings in R7. So there's no zoning change. There's no change to development regulations. It would just add apartment
Oh.
uses
You
for
can't tear one
existing
down.
buildings.
Yeah, right, okay. So, but the multifamily use permission has no dwelling unit limit?
Correct.
There's no distinction among dwelling unit limits?
No density regulations.
Yeah, but I think you'd be hard pressed, and Andrew, you're an architect, but I think you'd be hard pressed to somehow build enough apartments where you would have more people living there than, you know, it once had as a sorority
As
or
an
fraternity.
And the R7 setbacks, heights, maximum coverage are similar to what other residential zoning?
R4. There
That's
is
what I was-
no change between the
Okay,
two.
that's why I was thinking that it was R4. The height and setback and regulations are equivalent to R4 in R7.
Correct. And
So,
But these additional permitted residential uses are only for existing buildings.
I understand, but they can knock them down. Well,
No.
they couldn't
they
build
could
a,
knock them down and build a dormitory.
yes,
They can knock them down and build a
single-family house.
single-family house.
That's
or
about
a
it.
boarding house.
Yeah.
And not a duplex.
Duplex not permitted by right.
Yeah,
Isn't
I'm
that
trying to
crazy?
remember because I
Only-
don't have the thing in front of me.
Only
Um,
existing.
Not permitted at all.
So if somebody wanted to build a reasonable apartment, they could build a reasonable apartment. Okay, okay, got it. Well, my reaction is it would still be nice if we could clean up the permitted uses, but it's not a trivial task. I don't think it's something we're gonna sit here and do for reasons of abstractions of what do we know?
Could I ask for just general direction on that? The 4 categories that we took out are the 4 that were incorporated into the survey, and we kept them general in the survey because we were trying to stay out of the weeds, but I understand, this is probably the place to get into the weeds. Are there ones specifically that you take significant issue with, or is it more like broad categories that are problematic?
Well, I think the issue is east and west of Lincoln. If we're not going to make that distinction, then I don't think we can do much with the table of uses.
I think that's where option 1 and 2 came in the first memo that came to Plan Commission. And now, if we're going to require a special use permit for any of the properties in R7, that's when.
Yeah, okay.
So just as a matter of process, could we just add the language that is recommended on this memo around differentiating the east and west link? What's the complication of doing that? What's the problem with, I know the process seems to resolve itself, but what would be the harm in adding the explicit language?
Well, I mean, as we proposed it now, there would be, if you're just requiring special use permits for everything anywhere, then there would be no need to create a distinction. But if you wanted to somehow distinguish between what's allowed here versus there, then that's something that we could do. I think we got the impression I think the feedback we've gotten from the public has been sort of mixed. So, we could go either way, or something's going to make some people happy, something's going to make other people happy, maybe. I think at the end of the day, though, just requiring special use permits everywhere, it's probably not going to lead to much difference in the end result, and I think it's just gonna be, I think, a safer approach to take at this point.
So are we starting to feel comfortable enough where we're at the point to entertain a motion on this one?
So one more question. Who knows how many more, but this one. Signage, which is the other issue raised. Do we have signage discretion under special use permits?
No. That was incorporated into the zoning ordinance language that was included in this supplementary memo and the first one. It would not be incorporated into the special use permit process. It would be independent of that with
Well,
a
and
sign
by
permit.
right is what I mean. It's by
Not-
right.
Well, with a sign permit under the allowances in the tables that were included. And those are the exact same as for the mixed office residential zoning district. So you could apply for a sign for your commercial use in R7 under the regulations that were included that are the same as the mixed office residential zoning
Right.
district.
What I'm trying to imagine, again, is the signs permitted are pretty big. They make sense on Lincoln Avenue, they don't make sense on Ohio. But because the sign regulations are by right under the sign ordinance as incorporated or referenced in the zoning ordinance, we don't have discretion over those under special use. Which would be nice.
Could we do
I
that
guess-
as a
I mean,
condition?
I think you could probably, like, if you're talking about location, you might be able to regulate it based on whatever site plan they propose. I guess you might be able to add a condition that would lower the size of a sign. I'm not sure. That's
It's also
possible.
true under a special use permit that we can pretty much negotiate.
Right,
Right.
so I think you could say,
Anything, so-
yeah, I think you could say
Okay.
smaller sign in this location, but you couldn't somehow
But
allow
it
like a
would be part
larger
of the
sign.
site plan, approved site plan. Okay, okay.
You said that was your first question.
Yeah, I said that was one question. I didn't distinguish whether, one of my mentors always said, I've got 3 questions, and then he added a fourth. But, so we have 4 voters. And we're not going to be challenged on the quorum question. Okay? So, where are we?
Well, are we comfortable with the way it's worded if we were to make a motion, or are we thinking there are conditions that we would apply? I haven't heard anything, I haven't heard a consensus around any conditions that we would add to the way it's described. Or not conditions, but changes, I suppose.
Well, I'll just weigh in, at least with, since I can still give an opinion. Still on the east or west of Lincoln Avenue, again, my opinion still is that a special use permit isn't too big of a hill on either side. And I realize, and to me, that's also seemed to be what the public, especially in the surveys, really wanted, right? They didn't really want anything by right, and I can appreciate that, and again, to me, it's not too big of a step to ask, so that's just my opinion, so, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blunt.
And I wasn't thinking of the distinction being between special use permit and none. I was thinking of it as being the table of uses. And I don't see a short-run solution to the table of uses problem. I mean, the formatting, I think, is an easy thing, because this is not actually the table as it would appear anyway. And without that, then I don't see a good way to make the distinction between east and west of Lincoln. And reminded that we're adding residential uses to the non-historical properties actually does accomplish something for those, which I think maybe for some people like me, but I think also maybe for others, needs to be part of the explanation of what we're up to, because I think that helps get over the notion that we're just doing part of it and ignoring the other part. I think it actually accomplishes a good deal for the other R7s. The developers might not think so, but others, you know. So I'm willing to make a motion that we send this to the City Council with a recommendation of approval. I move 2438T22, send to Council with recommendation of approval.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Hopkins, second by Ms. Billman. Any discussion?
If we do.
Last chance. This is your fourth question.
I gather the footnotes are chunky, but I just want to make sure that there's some way to capture that the distinctions about what we're talking, I mean, like, when I think about the memo, right? We just want, it's all the things that we've just been talking about here, and it's got to be some way that those points are clear, right? The point that you just made, the clarity about what a Greek house, the clarity about signage, like all of those are the minutia that I know are implied in your head, but an external person wouldn't know if it isn't articulated some way, right? If we're not adding amendments, I get that, then how do we make sure that the concerns that people would have clearly get reflected in the final document? Again, it could be amendments, it could be somehow.
Well, it wouldn't be formal, but in the memo that goes to council, I mean, there is some summarizing of this discussion, because there has to be a basis for the recommendation. But I agree that articulating some of these issues that got left to the side with the focus on commercial special use is important.
Yeah, so I think there's what's in the ordinance. All of these, the signage, it's all addressed in the proposed language in the text amendment, but making sure that some of the concerns get addressed in the way that this is presented to council, I guess. Any other discussion? All right, let's have a roll call, please.
Where are we at? Ms. Sims?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Ms. Billman?
Yes.
Mr. Fell is abstain. Wait, I guess Mr. Fell
Abstain?
and Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
All right, that passes. Do we have a date for council on that one?
This will actually be going to committee on May 2nd. and then whatever council meeting it ends up at.
Okay.
Good luck. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to plan case number 2425T21, a request by the Urbana zoning administrator to amend the Urbana zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, definitions, Article 5, use regulations, Article 6, development regulations, and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. Mr. Ricci.
Good evening, everybody. And bringing to you another long-in-the-works project. The zoning administrator requests an amendment to Article 13 of the zoning ordinance to add definitions and establish use provisions for principal use solar arrays and accessory solar arrays. The requested changes would more accurately reflect the nature of solar energy systems and their operation, and would regulate them based on their construction and location, but not on intended use, as was initially incorrectly mentioned at the beginning of the staff report. So focusing just on construction and location. The proposed amendment would add Section 13.9, solar energy systems, to regulate solar energy installations. It would also make minor changes to Articles 2, 5, and 6. The City of Urbana has long expressed an interest in promoting renewable energy sources such as wind and solar, including it as an objective in its 2005 comprehensive plan and incorporating it into its climate inheritance and climate action plan. Urbana's Sustainability and Resiliency Officer, Scott Tess, worked with the Great Plains Institute in 2015 to evaluate whether the city's regulations facilitate or inhibit development of solar energy systems. And this, a recommendation from them is shown in Exhibit B, I believe. We'll look at that in a bit. The proposed text amendment meets several of these recommendations by adding definitions for principal and accessory solar energy systems, allowing principal solar energy systems as a principal use, and allowing accessory solar energy systems in all zoning districts. Our current regulations have required planning staff to handle proposed solar energy systems in less than optimal ways. A recent request to establish a principal use solar energy system at the City of Urbana's closed landfill was allowed with a special use permit, as the system was treated as the most similar use of electrical substation. This is one of the authorities of the zoning administrator to find the most similar use for a proposed use that isn't explicitly allowed in the table of uses, but it's not the best way to do things. Staff have also received inquiries from people who would like to install small solar arrays, but have expressed concern about the additional cost of providing extensive screening of them. They have also asked why solar arrays are required to be screened from view, but large accessory structures like a utility building require no screening. Here is Exhibit A, which is the zoning options and recommendations letter from the Great Plains Institute. I provided some highlighting. It's there in the exhibit. I'm not going to go through it, but they do talk about adding definitions, should explicitly clarify which districts the accessory uses should be allowed in, and lots of other interesting things that we did not incorporate into this because we're doing it a bite, as was said earlier today. The current planning and zoning best practice is to treat small solar arrays as accessory structures rather than as mechanical systems. The American Planning Association, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association all recommend this. This is from the Planning for Solar APA planning, PAS number 575. This is from the best management practices for solar from SolSmart, which is a program of the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, which is a not-for-profit that provides education and bulk purchase program administration. And then this is a page from that which recommends definitions, lot coverage, setbacks, roof coverage. Staff did a lot more research collecting model zoning ordinances and actual zoning ordinances, solar specific, from probably 25 to 30 other places. Put them in a matrix, figured out what the kind of the most the median or average or the most often way of addressing it was, and then realized, let's focus on Urbana. It's good to know what other jurisdictions are doing. It's more important to know maybe what some of your model ordinances are doing, but focus on, Central Illinois and what we have been seeing as people proposing as projects to us. So the current case started as Plan Case 2359 T18 back in 2018. The Urbana Plan Commission held a public hearing in 2019. Planning staff brought the issue to a follow-up study session of Plan Commission in 2021. Staff also discussed the issue with the Urbana Sustainability Advisory Commission, and will be presenting this draft language to them at their May 3rd meeting for comments and to solicit support. Based on those discussions and our research, staff propose the following approach. Adding a new section 13.9 to the zoning ordinance where all of the other special development provisions are located, like wind energy systems, planned unit developments, mobile home parks, because large principal use solar arrays are of the scope and size and impact of those similar things, wind farms, mobile home parks, as opposed to putting it in Section 5 where things like cannabis use and adult entertainment are located, which are smaller and more constrained uses. Adding definitions to distinguish between principal use and accessory use solar energy systems that point back to the existing definitions of principal use and accessory use. We would make minor changes to Articles 2, 5, and 6. We would permit solar farms in the ag zoning district by right and as a special use in business, industrial, conservation, recreation, and education, and higher intensity residential R4 and higher zoning districts as a special use that would come to Plan Commission for recommendation and then go to City Council for a final vote. Permit solar arrays, specifically by definition ground-mounted systems in all districts, some with specific definite conditions. And then allow building-mounted, like roof or wall, solar energy systems in all districts, exempting them from the amendment and regulating them as mechanicals as we do now. Here is, I think it's Exhibit C from the staff report showing the ag district in green. That is approximately 140 acres worth throughout the city corp limits, and it's in 6 separate ag zoned areas, including the Urbana landfill project, where the current principal use solar array that's being treated as an electrical substation is, including, we'll just zoom in here. The north part is the landfill. In the middle, it's East Lawn Cemetery along Cunningham Avenue on the left, and there is a farm and house lot east of, north of the highway, and 6 house lots that are still zoned ag. The likelihood, it is not large enough to put a solar farm on either of those properties. Possibly a small ground-mounted solar array, but not a solar farm, which is typically, over 13 acres. And then down at the south is the Berkey's shop and the electrical substation that is on the north side of Windsor and the vet clinic on the south side of Windsor. And finally, permitting solar arrays, ground-mounted ones, as accessory structures in all zoning districts. So jumping over to looking at the actual language, I am actually going to bring up the Word document because I believe perhaps some of the markup did not show up in the PDF. As I was looking at my copy, I did not see it on there. There we go. So, switching over to all markup. All markup. There we go. Okay. And we don't need those comments. Okay, so what these all show is we take the snips out of the zoning ordinance of just the parts we're changing, either adding or deleting. The bit in section 2 is general provisions. We shifted the word and we added in solar energy systems. In doing this review, we noted that we had never added wind energy systems into this when we did the wind energy section. So this is fixing an omission that we had missed back when we added the wind energy section. So this is basically directing people to Article 13 for special development provisions. And then the next change is in Table 5.1 in the section that is of industrial uses, because I feel that a solar farm is closest to an industrial use than residential or public or even commercial. I mean, could go either way. So, you know, if that is a big enough thing that you want to change, that is doable. But industrial makes sense. You're manufacturing electricity to be sold at wholesale. So it adds the principal use solar farm, which will be defined in Article 13. It shows all of the districts that it would be a special use in, and shows in the ag district that it would be a permitted use. The next section that we make a minor change to is section 6.5 yards. There is currently, so section 6.5b says all yards need to remain unobstructed and open to the sky. And this is required yards, so like your setback is what people usually call it. This is saying you can't put things in the setback, and then it lists 15 things that are allowed to be in the setback. Number 13 is ground-mounted solar panels up to a height of 6 feet in the R districts, allowing them in the required side and rear yards. Because the purpose of this amendment is to treat ground-mounted solar arrays as other accessory structures on the ground, there's no reason to have a specific exemption for them. We would exempt them as we would exempt any other accessory structure, which other accessory structures are allowed, I think it's in number 6, but we're not making any changes to it, so it's not shown here. Allows them in side and rear yards up to 18 inches. So we deleted section 13 because it's no longer necessary, and then we renumbered the next 2 sections to keep the numbering in line. And then the final change in the non-special development section is to screening. The only change is adding a footnote saying screening of solar energy systems will be regulated in Article 13.9. So as you read this article, it has said ground-mounted mechanical equipment for all non-residential uses shall be screened from view at ground level from public rights-of-way and adjacent residential districts. People have interpreted that as to include ground-mounted solar arrays. because we are no longer treating ground-mounted solar arrays as mechanicals, we're treating them as accessory structures. We don't require other accessory structures to be screened from public view. So we could have said, comma, except for solar energy systems, but it was cleaner to put in a footnote and say, look to here, because we still do require screening, and it's a little more complicated, so we're directing people to where we're dealing with it. Okay, and that's all of the changes that are to the rest of the zoning ordinance. And then we get into the new special development, section 13.9. We add in a purpose statement as we do for the wind energy system. This particular one was adopted or modified from the National Renewable Energy Lab's definition. Talks about it's in the public interest to encourage the use and development of solar energy and to help promote local clean jobs. To facilitate the effective and efficient use of solar energy systems while protecting the public health, safety, and welfare of residents and the general public. This is substantially the same as the purpose statement from the wind energy system. The next section is a very short definition section. I think the wind energy system was like 20 definitions. We've got 3. A general solar energy system definition, a collection of photovoltaic panels or other devices, because there are solar collectors and flowers and things that also convert sunlight into electricity, so we're trying to be as flexible as possible. 10 years down the road, they'll be using algae to collect and convert energy into electricity. And then to our what I call our principal use and accessory use definitions. A solar array is an accessory use solar energy system with a footnote that says, see principal use and accessory use definitions in section 2.3. So a solar array, and it's only first because it's alphabetical, is basically a solar array that's an accessory use to a principal use. And then solar farm is a principal use solar energy system, directs you back to the definition of principal use. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we figure those out later on in the presentation. But we didn't get into who's using it, whether it is intended for wholesale production to the grid, on the lot, whatever, just going back to our existing definitions. Applicability, this is similar to wind energy system. This section applies only to new solar energy systems. Pre-existing solar energy systems are not required to meet the requirements of this section. And we do that elsewhere. We don't retroactively apply our zoning ordinance. Permits required. This sounds pretty basic. Solar energy systems require all applicable permits, whether that's local, state, federal, our building permits. If somebody comes up with some new regulatory system that applies, this will going forward apply to those as well. And then we get into our permitted by right and by special use section. So, use determination. The zoning administrator shall determine if a system is a solar farm or a solar array based on its intended purpose and on the criteria for accessory uses outlined in section 5.2. So the reference back to its intended purpose is when the applicant comes in and says, I want to build this thing. And the zoning administrator then says, okay, what's its intended purpose? It's like applying for a zoning permit. The city doesn't have zoning permits, though. The county does. But we still have to work with the applicant to figure out, we've got a 5-page table of uses. Where do we pigeonhole your use in? And if they say, I'm building a 20-acre solar array, what's its intended purpose? Well, I'm selling it to the grid. Okay, it's a solar farm. I'm building a 750 square foot solar array on my house. What's its purpose? To power my house. Okay, pretty simple. It's a solar array, not a solar farm. If it gets into other things in the middle, it's up to the zoning administrator to figure out if it's going to be treated as a solar farm, principal use, or as a solar array, ground-mounted accessory use. And I think that's the direction we got from Plan Commission, was focus on our existing definitions, and go from there.
A quick question.
Please.
The example you used was a roof-mounted solar array, but it's exempt from this anyway. So
Yes, it is.
what you mean is a
Even a
ground-mounted
right.
accessory use in a residential yard or something.
Right.
But while we're here, also, I could have a huge solar array on top of an industrial building. It's still exempt from all of these.
Absolutely.
Because it's building mounted.
Right, yes. Yep. And, you know, we realized that, you know, the purpose of zoning is to address the impacts that a new use.
I just
yeah.
wanted to clarify because the
Yes.
slip of your example.
Yeah. And so, moving down into the, and so it also refers them back to the accessory uses outlined in section 5.2, which talks about an accessory use will be subordinate to a principal use in size and be compatible in character and all those things. Treating it like we treat any other accessory structure. Number 2, building mounted solar energy systems are permitted by right within all zoning districts and are exempt from further regulation of this section. If you had, I started with the, you know, the decision tree that we had for the county, and it rapidly became very simple, and I didn't even bother making one because it was roof mounted or building mounted exempt, and we've got 2 different choices here. Going into those, ground mounted solar energy systems. So building mounted, ground mounted. Under building ground mounted, we have solar farms and solar arrays. Solar farms are permitted in the ag district. They're permitted as a special use in all of those other districts that I already mentioned to you. Getting into the nitty-gritty, site plans for solar farms shall include the following: number and location of inverters, solar panels, access drives, grid interconnection, and any other information required by the zoning administrator. Inverters shall be located at least 150 feet from property lines. That's our only real distance, and I won't say it was necessarily arbitrary, because I looked at other, you know, zoning codes. What this does, though, is requires, for a solar farm, even if you only have one inverter set up, it requires you to have at least a 2-acre parcel, you know, 300 feet by 300 feet, that's if it's a perfect square, and no buildings in the way. The likelihood is that you're going to be working with a much larger parcel, but this at least keeps the noisiest bits 150 feet from any potential neighbor. Okay, it's not the only check and balance, though. Number 4, solar farms located within 500 feet of a residential use, not district, residential use, must provide a landscape buffer meeting the requirements of section 62A2, B3, 4, 5, and 8. I love saying that. Which is similar landscaping requirements that we have for other things, other industrial uses using the landscape buffer table, or outdoor storage requirements. So this is trying to treat it similarly to other industrial uses. In addition, though, existing landscaping may satisfy this requirement subject to approval by the zoning administrator. So if you're out in the country and you've already got a windrow going, you don't need to plant another one. And it doesn't say existing landscaping on your property. You know, we leave it up to the zoning administrator to figure out, but also to plan commission, because it's going to come through for the special use if it's in a non-ag district. And then finally, catch-all, solar farms must comply with applicable state and local regulations, including the City of Urbana Code of Ordinances, Chapter 16, noise and vibrations. So we treat their noise like we treat everybody else's noises. You know, stationary noise must be less than 80 decibels, blah, blah, blah. And that is measured at the property line, which would be at least 150 feet away from your inverters. Going into the second type, solar arrays are permitted on all zoning districts. They, again, must meet all criteria for accessory structures outlined in section 5.2C and comply with all other sections of this ordinance governing accessory structures, which would include setbacks and height requirements. They are excluded from gross floor area calculations, which most accessory structures are. You know, garages we don't include in gross floor area calculations. We did discuss this at earlier Plan Commission meetings, and we'd come up with that. A little trickier to deal with, but I think we did a good job. The area beneath a solar array is considered open space if the following criteria outlined in section 6.4C3 sub-item 3 apply. And so this is trying to treat it like the open space underneath a balcony. First of all, if it comprises no more than 50% of the lot area, you don't get credit for your entire solar array counting for as open space. And that's is verbatim from the other section. It does not comprise more than 25% of the total open space. And there is a minimum clearance of 7 feet 6 inches between the ground level and the underside of the solar panel assembly. Because the intent of our existing open space section is to provide for recreational space. It isn't about native plants and drainage and stuff. It's about people using their property. So if you put it up 7 feet 6 inches, and if it's a pergola, or it's some other outdoor recreational structure, it gets to be considered open space, just like your balcony gets to be considered open space. And
Marcus-
finally,
Marcus, can I ask something?
Yes.
So these are usually tilted, right? So is that the access point that it's tilting on that you're measuring?
I think it would probably be, no, I think at lowest point,
The
minimum.
lowest point?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd be open for, when we measure roof height though, elsewhere, it's at the midpoint of the pitch. So,
Of the overhang. Oh, no, you mean for height? No.
Right.
Okay.
yeah, so if you have a steep
Yeah,
roof,
right.
the height isn't the peak, but it gets complicated, and so I would prefer to just say the lowest point. So should maybe it say the lowest point? Or, sorry.
Oh, I don't know. I don't really know how, that seems high to me, but I don't know how high these are typically mounted.
So we have other places in the zoning ordinance where it talks about signs. So if you have a freestanding sign or a projecting sign, 9 feet?
I believe so.
Okay,
I'll double
so
check.
the clearance is about people walking into it or not walking into it and it not hitting their head. So the 7 feet 6 inches came from the balcony definition of open space. So we were simply trying to treat it like we already allow treating balconies.
It's just a
Andrew.
minor point, that's also that's the limit of a habitable space in the building code. So probably the driver here a long time ago was make this a habitable space. So the building code is 7'6". So that's probably where it came from.
Again, though, you could apply for a variance if for some reason you wanted it to be 7 feet or 6'6", or you got a good deal, or you could apply for a variance to that to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then that's the end of the real text language, not bad, a half a page, page and a half. We get into the table that is 3 rows long. Mounting style, zones it's permitted in, minimum setback, and maximum system height. We start off with building mounted. They're permitted in all zoning districts, and there are no setback or system height requirements because it's exempt from this amendment. The next intense item is solar arrays, by definition ground mounted. Permitted in all zoning districts, must comply with minimum yard requirements for accessory structures, must comply with height requirements for accessory structures in the district it is located in. And there's a footnote there that directs you to a existing section in the zoning ordinance where accessory structures height is regulated. And then finally, solar farms permitted in the ag district, the special use permit districts, minimum setbacks, it has to comply with the yard requirements for principal structures in the zoning district it's located in. And it refers you back to the development regulation table. And again, it reminds them inverters must be at least 150 feet from all property lines. And then for height, again, we treat it like any other principal structure, has to comply with the height requirements, and it refers them back to the table of development regulations. And that's the language, and I'm happy to entertain questions while we're in the language.
Thank
If
you,
that's
Mr. Ricci.
okay.
Any
There-
questions?
There is more presentation-y
Oh.
stuff.
Any questions at this point for Mr. Ricci about the language?
I'm not sure what remains.
Is that your question?
I'll show you.
Well, I don't know what questions to ask if they're just going to be answered in what
Um,
comes up.
It's simply the options and the recommendation.
Oh, okay, okay. So, I may have gotten lost in trying to go through the details.
Sure,
The building mounted are treated as mechanicals.
yes,
Mechanicals on residential roofs don't require screening.
correct.
Mechanicals on industrial roofs do require screening.
Not by the zoning ordinance. Our section
Okay.
is strictly for ground-mounted
No,
mechanicals.
no, no,
Oh.
no. Forget,
Oh,
this doesn't apply. I'm talking only about building mounted.
mm-hmm,
Okay, so a building mounted industrial is treated as a mechanical.
yes.
I thought that mechanicals like air conditioning and so on had to be screened on some industrial zoning units? No?
Not by the zoning ordinance.
Oh, okay. So,
That-
well, all I'm concerned about is that solar arrays treated as mechanicals on industrial do not need to be screened, so.
Correct.
That answers the
Yep.
question. Okay.
And that is really the end of the presentation. Oh, actually, there's more. I'll try and keep it brief. We already talked about the Plan Commission opened the public hearing in 2019. The discussion helped guide later research and reshape questions and draft language. We had a follow-up study session. The following goals and objectives of the 2005 comprehensive plan relate to this case. Goal 17, minimize incompatible land uses. Where land use incompatibilities exist, promote development and design controls to minimize concerns. And then provide maximum service and dependable utilities, specifically promote the use of alternative energy sources such as wind and solar. The findings are summarized in the staff report. I won't go over them unless you want me to. The Plan Commission has the following options for recommendations to City Council. Recommend approval as presented herein, recommend approval as modified by specific suggested changes, or recommend disapproval of the text amendment. Staff recommends that Plan Commission forward this case to the Urbana City Council with a recommendation to approve as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Ricci. Any further questions for staff? All right. As we have no members of the public, I think we can bypass the public input portion for this one and move into discussion. Anyone have anything for discussion on this?
So, I would make one communication comment in how you convey this. When you show the map of where solar farms could occur, it shows lots of R4 in the middle of the city where solar farms are not going to occur. So I think it may be worth pointing out to people, reminding people that they're all special uses. And this just simplifies things, so people don't panic about having solar farms in residential neighborhoods. And it's not going to happen because of the distance and lot size requirements and a whole lot of other things. But it's mainly the special uses. So I would move that we send plan case 2425T21 to the city council with recommendation of approval.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Hopkins, second,
I'll second.
and a second by Mr. Fell. Any further discussion? All right, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Mr. Fell?
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Ms. Billmoon?
Yes,
Ms. Sims?
Yes.
That motion passes.
All right, do we have a date for council on that one?
Probably May 2nd,
Okay.
or May 9th. May 2nd is committee.
Thanks for your work on that one, Mr. Ricci. I know that was long in the process.
Thank you for your direction on your patience.
All right, since we have no old business and no new public hearings, we'll move on to our new business for this evening, which is CCZBA 040AT22, an amendment to the Champaign County zoning ordinance to allow private or commercial transmission and receiving towers over 100 feet in height as a second principal use on lots with an electrical substation in the AG1 and AG2 districts.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
So as you have just heard, this is a proposal by the Champaign County Zoning Administrator to amend the Champaign County zoning ordinance to allow telecom towers over 100 feet in height as a second principal use on lots with an electrical substation in the Ag 1 and Ag 2 districts by special use permit. That's a lot of prepositions, I know. So municipalities have protest rights for county amendments to the zoning ordinance. So Plan Commission's responsibility is to review the proposed amendment to determine how it may affect the city and to recommend to City Council whether or not to protest the amendment. Under state law, a municipal protest of the amendment would require a 3/4 supermajority of votes to approve the request at County Board. Otherwise, a simple majority is required. Staff believes the proposed text amendment does not significantly affect the use of land or affect the city's ability to manage growth and development and recommends no protest of the proposed text amendment. Just a little background on why this text amendment is coming up now. Champaign County Planning and Zoning has a client, Eastern Illini Electrical Cooperative, who is interested in installing 120-foot tall telecom towers to monitor 5 existing substations in Champaign County. An internet provider would then also be interested in piggybacking on those towers with antennae to bring internet service to rural areas. None of those substations currently under discussion are within Urbana's extraterritorial jurisdiction. To my knowledge and to the Champaign County zoning, Planning and Zoning Department's knowledge, there's not currently an inventory and map of where substations in the county are. But as far as the county zoning administrator knows, all substations currently in the ETJ are operated by Ameren, Illinois, and exempt from county zoning as a public utility and thus not subject to the proposed amendment. They could actually do what's being proposed to be allowed by special use anyway. This is the text of the proposed amendment. Telecom towers over 100 feet tall are already allowed in the county by special use permit in all districts except for I-2 heavy industry, where they're allowed by right. Towers are not, however, currently allowed as a second principal use as has been proposed. The proposed amendment would limit towers as a second principal use on lots with electrical substations and only in the Ag 1 and Ag 2 agricultural zoning districts with a special use permit. And Urbana would be able to submit comments on Champaign County special use permit cases within the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So this is a map of county agricultural districts within Urbana's extraterritorial jurisdiction. You can see the green areas represent a majority of county land in the ETJ, And this looks like a lot of land that's potentially going to be impacted by this proposed amendment. But again, there are currently no actual lots with affected substations in the ETJ. City staff reviewed the proposed text amendment as it relates to our zoning ordinance and does not see any potential land use conflicts in the city or the ETJ. The city zoning ordinance table of uses currently allows telecom towers in the AG agricultural district with a special use permit and does not explicitly regulate tower height in the district other than as part of the special use permit process. Section 13-1 pertaining to telecommunications towers states that antennas and towers may be considered as a principal or accessory use, and that a different existing use of an existing structure on the same lot shall not preclude the installation of an antenna or tower on such a lot. So in sum, the city zoning ordinance already allows what the county has proposed to allow. There are some additional requirements for towers in the city related to the designation of the AG agricultural district as a residential zoning district as it pertains to the section on telecom towers. For example, the city zoning ordinance states that towers in residential districts must be set back a distance to at least 200% of the height of the tower from any residential lot front, side, and rear yard setback line. So this would potentially require greater setbacks for towers in the agricultural district than is required by the county in agricultural districts, where they require a 100-foot setback for towers over 100 feet tall from any major, minor, and collector seats, or a 50-foot setback from side and rear streets. Otherwise, if the tower isn't actually located near a residential lot, the default setback requirements in the city would be just the general agricultural setback requirements. With that said, the city could express any concerns regarding tower setbacks for future developments in the ETJ as part of the county's special use permit process. Although, again, there are currently no affected lots in the ETJ. The city zoning ordinance also requires that anyone wishing to locate a tower in a residential zoning district has to demonstrate why no other location is suitable. In this case, because any towers located on a lot with an electrical substation would presumably be there to, at least in part, monitor the adjacent substation, the conditions for demonstrating valid constraints preventing an alternate location would presumably be met. So given that the city ordinance already allows for the use that Champaign County is proposing to allow, and the city would be able to express concerns over differences in setback requirements as part of the required special use permit process for any second principal use tower in the ETJ, staff does not anticipate a negative effect on the city's ability to plan or manage growth and development. And again, any existing lots or with substations that would be immediately affected by the proposed amendment are outside of the city ETJ, although future lots with substations within the ETJ would be subject to the proposed amendment unless otherwise exempted as a public utility. So Plan Commission's options with CCZBA case 040-AT-22 are to forward the plan case to City Council with a recommendation to protest the proposed amendment, forward the plan case to City Council with a recommendation to protest the proposed amendment contingent upon specific provisions to be identified, or forward the plan case to City Council with a recommendation to not protest the proposed amendment. Staff recommends that Plan Commission forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to not protest the proposed amendment. And this would go to City Council on the 9th of May, and Champaign County Board would make a final decision on the amendment on May 18th. Thank you. I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Any questions for staff? Mr. Fell?
One quick question, just out of curiosity. This is a tower that monitors a substation. Why is it a second principal use and not an accessory use to the substation?
I'm not sure why the county would make that determination. I think it might have something to do with the scale of the tower.
My understanding is it's because an internet provider wants to use the tower for a second principal use of providing internet access. That's what
I can follow
read
that,
in
but,
it.
yeah, no, I understand that, and that was sort of why I thought they did that, but my logic went to, the substation exists without the tower, but the tower would not exist without the substation. They would not, you know?
Ameren could build it without the
Right,
special use permit.
right.
The internet provider could not put its internet equipment on it without
Correct.
this amendment because the county zoning administrator determines that's a different principle use.
And just to be clear, Ameren is exempt, but there are other operators of substations who are not exempt, and the people who are currently proposing to do this are not exempt, prompting the text amendment.
Well, so it's substations that are not Ameren?
Yes, these ones currently under discussion are operated by the Eastern Illini Electrical Cooperative, who are
okay.
not considered a public utility by the county.
Right, okay. Which is even better. One of, as, you're close enough to a city that you don't worry about this, but as somebody who also operates at a rural residence, this is a big deal.
All right. Any other questions for staff? All right. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
So we'll move into discussion. Anyone have anything for discussion?
Can I move?
You can.
I move that we forward plan case CCZBA, case number 040-AT-22, to the city council with a recommendation to not protest the amendment.
All right. We have a motion by Ms. Billman, second by Mr. Hopkins. Any further discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Ms. Billman,
Yes.
Mr. Allred,
Yes.
Mr. Fell,
Yes.
Ms. Sims,
Yes.
and Mr. Hopkins.
All right. That motion passes. Do we have a date for council?
May 9th.
Same? All right.
Got it right that time.
All right. As we have no audience participation, we will have no audience participation. Staff report?
None.
As we have no audience, I meant to say. Study session,
No.
and I assume we're skipping our closed session.
Yes, we will continue that to a less packed plan commission agenda.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Adjourned at 9:15.